Hey y'all, let's sew a Tinsley dress with a shelf bra. The first step is going to be to sew the side bodice to the front bodice. So you're going to put them right sides together, matching the notches, and then I like to pin them together at the bottom and ease that curve in, and then pin them together at the top, and again ease the rest in. Then you're going to sew them together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you're going to do the same thing with the other side bodice and the other side of the front center bodice. And after you have sewn them together, if you want to, you can press the seam toward one side and top stitch it in place. And the next step is going to be to sew the front and back bodices together. So I have my front bodice out flat with the right side up, and I'm going to put my back bodice with the right sides together, aligning the sides and raw edges, and I'm going to stitch them together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to do the same thing with the shelf bra pieces. So I'll have my front shelf bra and my back shelf bra together, and I'm going to stitch them on the short ends so it creates the side seams. Then I went ahead and I finished my shelf bra. On this one I just decided to use some fold over elastic instead of the band, but you can also use the band per the pattern. And then I'm going to have my shelf bra piece wrong side out and my main bodice right side out, and then I'm going to slip my shelf bra inside of the main bodice, and I'm going to align them at the side seams and then all of the top raw edges. So the pickup, the center neckline, and the back should all match up. And once I have them all pinned and clipped in place, then I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to baste the shelf bra to the main bodice about 1/8 inch away from the edge, all along the top, front and back. And then I'm going to just treat the shelf bra and the main bodice as one piece. Then I'm just going to set the bodice aside while we work on these shorties. So the first step is going to be to hem the top edge of your pocket pieces. So you will press a 1/2 inch back toward the wrong side along the top, and then edge stitch it in place on both pocket pieces. Then you're going to have your side panel right side up, and you're going to place the pocket directly on top with the right side up, and you're going to baste your pocket to the side panel. So just make sure that the raw edges and the notches all match up, and you're going to do this on each side panel and pocket piece. Then you're going to sew the side panel to the front center shorty. So I have my front center right side up, and I'm going to place the side panel on top with the right sides together, aligning the notches and the raw edges. And then you're going to sew that side panel to the center front shorties with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you're going to do this on both side panel pieces, and if you want to, you can press the seam toward one side and top stitch it in place. Then you need to sew the back pieces to the side panels. So I have my side panel right side up, and I'm going to take one back piece and put it right sides together to the side panel, aligning the raw edges and the notches, and you're going to stitch that back piece to the side panel with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to do it on the other side as well. Again, if you want to, you can press the seam toward one side and top stitch it in place. Next, you need to sew the back pieces together. So you're going to fold your piece in half and align the back raw edges with the right sides together, and you're going to sew the two back pieces together along that curve with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then we're going to attach the gusset to the front center piece. So I have my gusset piece folded in half so I could find the center, and I also found the center of the front shorties. And you're going to attach the non-notched side of the gusset to the front. So I'm going to put them right sides together and align the centers, and then pin the edge of the gusset to the edge of the shorties and ease that curve in, and do the same thing on the other side of the gusset. And then once I have it pinned in place, I'm going to take it to my machine and I'm going to sew the gusset to the front shorties with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then you're going to attach the back side of the gusset to the back shorties. So again, I found the center of the gusset, and then I'm going to pin that center to the center seam of the back shorties. Then pin those edges in place and ease the curves together. Then sew the gusset to the back shorties with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then to finish the shorties, you're going to hem each leg by pressing a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side and then edge stitching each hem in place, and then give your shorties a nice press, and you can set them aside for a moment while we work on our skirt pieces. You're going to have your center skirt right sides up, and you're going to take one side skirt and place it right sides together to the center, aligning the raw edges and the notches, and then you're going to stitch them together. If you're doing the slit option, then you will stop at the notch piece, so you can sew your slit. If you're not doing the slit, then you will sew it from the top to the hem line with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When I'm doing the slit, I really like to use my sewing machine first and then go back and finish with a serger, so I get a really clean finish on the slit. So once you sew them together, I like to snip into the notch just to the seam allowance but not through, so it makes pressing the slit opening a little bit easier. So then you will open the seam and you're going to press the unsewn edges a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side, and then you will edge stitch that in place to create the slit, so on each side and along the top. And then you're going to do the same thing with the other skirt side piece. So if you're going to do the slit, again, you'll stop at the notched edge, and if you're not, then you'll just stitch the entire thing. Then you're going to sew your front and back skirts together. So you will place the front and back skirts right sides together and sew them along each side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, creating the side seams of the skirt. And then you're going to hem your skirt. So you're going to press the bottom edge up a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side, and then you will just edge stitch that hem in place, and you can give your whole skirt a really nice press with your iron. Next, you're going to take your skirt and you're going to have it right sides out, and you'll take your shorties. You'll also have them right sides out. You're going to want to quarter the top of the shorties and the top of the skirt, and then you're going to place the shorties inside of the skirt, and you are going to match the quarter points of the shorties to the quarter points on your skirt. And you're going to align all the top raw edges. And once you have that all pinned in place, you're going to take it to your machine and you're going to baste your shorties to your skirt along the top edge of 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch from the top. And then you're just going to treat that shorties and skirt as one piece from now on. Next, it's time to attach the bodice to the bottom. So I have quartered the bodice and I have quartered the bottom portion, and I'm going to flip my bodice wrong side out and put it right side together with the bottom, and I'm going to match the side seams of the bodice to the side seam of the bottom, and I'm going to match the center of the front bodice to the center of the front skirt, and the center of the back to the center of the back skirt. You also want to make sure that you match the seam on the side panels on the top and bottom. You can base that portion together if you want to get it just perfect. And once you have it all pinned in place, you will take it to your machine and you're going to sew these two together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And if you want to, you can press a seam toward one side and top stitch it in place. Now we need to finish the necklines. So you are going to prep your binding like in the tutorial, and you're going to find the center of the binding and the center of the neckline, and with the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the bodice, you're going to match those center points and then match the edge of the binding to the edge of the neckline, and then ease the rest in place. And then you're going to take it to your machine and you are going to stitch directly on that crease line. And if you did the thinner binding, then you will have a smaller seam allowance, and if you did the thicker binding, then you're going to have a thicker seam allowance. And once you have the binding stitched to that neckline, you're going to refold and press that binding toward the right side and up and over, covering all the raw edges, and then you will edge stitch the binding to hold it in place. And you're going to do the same thing on the front neckline, and if you did the high scoop or low scoop back, you'll do the same thing on the back neckline. Once you have both necklines finished, then it's time to start working on the strap. So you are going to take your strap piece and you are going to fold it in half, the right sides together, and you're going to stitch the short ends together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then you will take your strap binding piece, and with the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the bodice, you're going to match the binding seam to the side seam of the bodice. Then you will match the front strap marking on your strap to the front of the bodice, and you will then ease the rest of the binding in place. And then you will match the back strap marking to the back bodice, and then you will pin and ease the rest of the binding in place. And then you're going to stitch the binding to the bodice. Again, you're going to stitch directly on that first crease line of your binding. So if it's the thicker binding like this, it's going to be a thicker seam allowance, and the thinner binding has the thinner seam allowance. Once you have it stitched, you're going to press it toward the right side up and over the raw edges, and you will pin the binding in place. You do want to make sure, if you did the high or low scoop option, that you don't lose the bar tack marking on your strap piece. So what I like to do is just add a pin on the side of the binding that I'm not sewing so I don't lose it. And then you will edge stitch the binding not only on the bodice but all the way on the strap as well to finish the straps. And then you're going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the bodice with the other binding piece. And once you have it all sewn, you want to give it a really nice press with your iron. Then to finish the bodice, you are going to create 3 lines of bar tacks on that bar tack marking on your strap piece. So I just like to use a longer straight stitch here, or you can use a chain stitch on your cover stitch machine. Both work well. and you're just going to go back and forth across both straps and make sure they're butted together. And if you're having trouble with your machine catching this, you can put a small piece of tearaway stabilizer or interfacing underneath the straps as you're sewing, and that will help. And once you have those sewn, then your Tinsley is complete. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below and I will try to answer. If you make one, as always, we really love to see them posted in our Facebook group or tag us on Instagram at Made for Mermaids, hashtag Made for Mermaids Pattern, hashtag Tinsley Pattern.